The heat pressed down like a weight as the formation stood frozen on the cracked desert ground, dust drifting through the air in slow, bitter waves. Boots were planted. Rifles were clutched tight. Sweat traced lines down rigid faces. And then, without warning, one voice cut through the silence. "Take her weapon. Now." Hands reached out, firm and public, pulling the rifle from her grip. Metal scraped. A few soldiers shifted. Someone let out a short laugh. Another smirked. The lead instructor stepped forward, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, slow and mocking. "This is what happens when paperwork gets confused for capability." A ripple of amusement passed through the ranks, not loud, not cruel, worse casual. Like it was already decided. "She doesn't belong here," someone whispered. A head shook behind her. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply nodded once, stepped back, and folded her hands behind her. No anger, no fear, just stillness. And none of them knew that in the next 90 seconds, everything they believed about strength, authority, and survival would collapse. That reputations would shatter, that footage would be sealed, and that the truth of who she really was never meant to surface. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to FOB Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Her name was Sergeant Lila Mercer. She was 29 years old, officially listed as a late transfer candidate from a logistical support background, someone who had spent most of her service behind desks, radios, and transport manifests. On paper, she was a misfit for a place like this, an elite desert training compound designed to crush hesitation out of people. The kind of place where strength was loud, confidence was sharp, and weakness was treated like an infection. Lila stood like she didn't belong. Not because she looked scared, but because she looked quiet. She wasn't tall. She wasn't broad. Her frame was compact, her shoulders narrow beneath the tan training uniform. No visible tattoos. No unit patches that meant anything to anyone. Her hair was tied back in a regulation bun, neat and simple, without a single loose strand. Her face carried no obvious story, no bravado, no nervousness, no hunger to impress. She didn't bounce on her heels like the others. She didn't scan faces, hoping to be noticed. She just stood. And in a place like Camp Raptor Ridge, stillness was mistaken for weakness. Staff Sergeant Cole Rourke had decided that the moment she stepped off the transport, Rourke was a career instructor, thick-necked, loud-voiced, built like he'd been carved from old concrete. His reputation was legendary across 3 bases. Some called him a builder of soldiers, others called him a bully with rank. He believed pressure made diamonds, and if it cracked a few along the way, that was the cost of forging strength. He saw Lila as an error. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she didn't perform confidence the way he expected. She didn't talk. She didn't puff her chest. She didn't announce herself. To Rourke, that meant she was hiding. And hiding meant lying. "She's a clerk," he told the instructors beside him that first day, eyes narrowing as he watched her from the observation platform. "Paper soldier. They always fold." The others laughed. Private First Class Jonah Hale didn't. Jonah stood in the formation 2 rows behind her. 19 years old, fresh out of basic, still carrying the wide-eyed awareness of someone who hadn't learned how to tune out details yet. He noticed things most people didn't. Like how Lila never looked lost, like how she didn't follow others. She anticipated them. Like how her breathing never changed, no matter how long they stood under the sun, and like how, when someone bumped her shoulder, she didn't shift it just enough to avoid contact without making it obvious. She wasn't clumsy. She was careful. Captain Mira Vance noticed too. Vance was assigned as the overseeing officer for the intake rotation. Early 40s, composed, sharp-eyed, known for reading files the way others read people. She'd reviewed Lila's record twice before arrival, and both times something had unsettled her. The file was too clean. No disciplinary actions. No commendations. No notable deployments. Just a bland chain of transfers, each one brief, each one vague. Her specialty fields were listed as support operations and auxiliary coordination, terms that could mean anything. Or nothing. The strangest part was the redacted emergency contact section. Not blank. Redacted. That didn't happen for civilians. That happened for ghosts. Lila Mercer didn't act like she had something to prove. She acted like she had something to protect. When the day's first break was called, the others collapsed onto crates, gulping water, complaining about the heat. Lila walked to the shade line, sat slowly, and untied her left boot. Not in a rush. Not with frustration. She brushed sand from the seam with 2 fingers, retied the lace, and pulled the knot tight, once, then again. She checked the tension like she was tuning an instrument. Then she took her canteen and drank. 3 sips. Pause. 2 more. She capped it, wiped her mouth, and looked out across the range without really looking at anything. Jonah watched her from a few feet away. He couldn't explain why, but it felt like she wasn't resting. She was waiting. Rourke, of course, saw her silence as defiance. "Something wrong with your mouth, Mercer?" he barked during a lineup. "Cat got your tongue, or you just too shy to speak?" A few chuckles followed. She met his gaze, calm and level. "No, Sergeant. No apology. No tone. Just fact." That made it worse. Rourke assigned her to the far end of drills, gave her the heaviest carry loads, paired her with louder, stronger candidates who liked to show off. He corrected her publicly, mocked her posture, questioned her endurance. Each time, she nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." "Understood, Sergeant." She never once rolled her eyes. Never muttered. Never flinched. Jonah began timing things. Not intentionally at first. Just out of curiosity. Her runs were always the same, down to the second. Her breathing never spiked. Her hands never shook. And yet, she moved just slow enough to avoid attention, not struggling. Not excelling. Hovering. Invisible. That scared him more than if she'd been exceptional. One night, as she sat alone cleaning dust from her sleeves, Jonah heard her whisper something under her breath. Not a name. Not a prayer. A count. Soft. Precise. He couldn't hear the numbers, but he knew what counting sounded like. And he knew why people did it. Lila never talked about herself. Not her past, not her family, not her dreams. But sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the range, her eyes changed. Not sad, not angry. Distant. Like she was remembering something she didn't want to explain. Once, while adjusting her sleeve, Jonah saw the faintest edge of a scar near her wrist. Thin. Pale, not from training. From something sharper, something older. She noticed him looking. She didn't hide it. She just pulled the sleeve down, and for a moment her gaze softened, not weak, but human. Like she was tired, not of the drills, but of being misunderstood. No one knew why she was really there. Not Rourke, not the other candidates, not even Jonah. But Captain Vance watched her that night through the glass of the command room, file in hand, heart unsettled. Because Lila Mercer didn't move like someone learning, she moved like someone remembering. And whatever she was hiding, it wasn't small. The first week was meant to strip away comfort. The second week was meant to strip away pride. By the third week, Camp Raptor Ridge started stripping away something else entirely: belief. The sun came up brutal and fast, turning the sand into a pale glare that burned the eyes. The instructors moved like shadows with clipboards, their voices carrying over the range in sharp commands. The candidates moved like a single organism, trying to keep pace, trying not to be noticed, trying not to be the slowest. Staff Sergeant Cole Rourke made sure Sergeant Lila Mercer was always noticed. He did it in small ways first. "Mercer, you look lost again. Mercer, you planning to survive the day or just spectate?" Mercer, if you're going to breathe that hard, at least do it with purpose." The words weren't screamed. That was the problem. They were delivered like casual truths, like the weather. Each jab was tossed just loud enough for the nearest ranks to hear, just quiet enough to pretend it wasn't personal, and every time, laughter flickered through the formation. Not cruel laughter, not villain laughter, the kind that people use to protect themselves. Because if they laughed, it meant it wasn't them. If they laughed, it meant they were safe. Lila never gave them anything back. She stood at attention when ordered, eyes forward, posture calm. When she ran clean and measured. When she fell behind on purpose, she did it without panic. When Rourke corrected her, she accepted it like a report. "Yes, Sergeant." "Understood, Sergeant." Nothing else. That silence became a target. On the obstacle course, they hit the rope wall under the hottest part of the morning. The rope fibers burned the palms. The wooden braces were slick with sweat and dust. Candidates shouted encouragement or curses or both. Some climbed with rage, some with desperation. Rourke made Lila climb last. He made the entire formation wait and watch. "Look at that," he said, loud enough for everyone. "She climbs like she's afraid of heights." A couple of candidates snorted. Lila placed her boot, tested the rope once, then started up. Slow, controlled. No wasted movement. No frantic pulling. Just steady progress like she had all day. Rourke leaned in as she reached the top. "You want me to call medics for you up there, Mercer?" She didn't look down at him. "No, Sergeant." She swung her leg over, descended cleanly, and landed without stumbling. The laughs weren't as confident this time. Private First Class Jonah Hale saw what no one else wanted to admit. Her hands weren't trembling. Her breathing wasn't ragged. She wasn't exhausted. She was pacing herself like someone following a plan. Jonah started watching her the way you watch a clock. The march drills came next. Long-distance movement with weighted packs, timed checkpoints, minimal water. It wasn't meant to be fair. It was meant to reveal what people were when their bodies started bargaining. Rourke gave Lila an extra sandbag. Not officially, not on paper. Just shoved it into her ruck with a grin. "Here," he said. "You look like you need a challenge." A few candidates glanced away. No one spoke. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have said something, knowing his rank could crush you with a single report? Would you have stayed quiet, like the rest of them, and pretended you didn't see? Lila accepted the weight without a flicker. "Yes, Sergeant." She didn't complain. She didn't roll her shoulders in protest. She simply adjusted the straps, tightened them, and stepped back into line. They marched. Dust rose in thick sheets behind the formation, coating teeth and tongues. The straps cut into shoulders. Boots thudded with a rhythm that turned into suffering. People started talking to themselves. Some started limping. One candidate vomited and kept walking. Rourke walked beside Lila like a predator. "How's that extra weight feel, Mercer?" She kept her eyes forward. "Manageable, Sergeant." He laughed, and the laughter drew other eyes toward her. Some looked with disdain. Some looked with pity. Some looked with relief that it wasn't them. Jonah watched her breathing. It stayed even. Not easy, not effortless, but managed. And managed meant practiced. When the formation hit the first checkpoint, candidates dropped their packs like bodies collapsing. Some fell onto their backs, staring up at the merciless blue sky. Others sucked air like they were drowning. Lila didn't collapse. She lowered her pack carefully, knees bent, back straight. Then she sat on the ground with her canteen and drank the same way she always did. 3 sips. Pause. 2 more. Cap. She was already recovering before everyone else finished suffering. The next day was weapons handling. The adaptive rifle they issued was standard for the course. Clean, modern, heavy enough to punish sloppy technique. Candidates were ordered to field strip and reassemble under time pressure, hands shaking from fatigue, instructors circling like sharks. Rourke walked behind Lila with exaggerated patience. "Now this," he said, addressing the group while looking directly at her, "is why you don't send office workers to a rifle course." A burst of laughter. Lila picked up the rifle like it was unfamiliar. She held it a fraction too cautiously. She adjusted her grip like she was learning. She made a show of checking the bolt twice. Jonah felt his stomach tighten because he saw what she was doing. She wasn't struggling. She was performing struggle. Her fingers moved to the right pins without searching. Her wrist rotated at the exact angle needed. When a part resisted, she applied pressure in the right direction without hesitation, like muscle memory guiding her. Rourke watched, convinced he was watching incompetence. Jonah watched, realizing he was watching control. When the timer rang, most candidates were still scrambling, parts scattered, sweat dripping onto metal. Lila's rifle clicked into place quietly. She remained still, hands resting on her thighs like she'd been waiting. Rourke stared at her finished weapon. He didn't praise it. He couldn't. He turned his head like he hadn't seen it. "Lucky," he muttered, then snapped at the next candidate. That was when the laughter started changing. It became whispers. Because luck didn't explain how she did it again the next day. Or the next. Or how her hands never shook when everyone else's did. Or how she never seemed surprised by anything. Hand-to-hand days were worse. The mats baked under the sun. The air smelled like sweat and dust and adrenaline. Candidates were paired off based on instructional value, which was Rourke's way of saying he chose matchups that made a point. He paired Lila with the biggest men in the formation. One of them, Specialist Connor Yates, stepped onto the mat with a grin that wasn't friendly. "She okay?" someone joked. "She looks like she's gonna snap in half." Rourke folded his arms. That's the lesson. Yates moved hard and fast, trying to overwhelm her with size and aggression. Most people would backpedal. Most people would panic. Lila didn't. She shifted. A half step to the side, weight dropping low, hands rising in a guard that looked almost casual. Yates lunged, and she redirected his arm with a small movement that turned his momentum into emptiness. He stumbled. Not much, just enough. The formation went quiet. Yates recovered and came again, angry now. He grabbed for her shoulder, tried to drive her down. Lila's hands moved in a clean sequence trap, rotate, sweep. She didn't throw him. She guided him. He hit the mat in a way that didn't break him, but it did humiliate him. Rourke barked, "Stop." He stepped onto the mat fast. "What was that?" he demanded, like her success was an insult. Lila sat up slowly, calm as ever. "A counter, Sergeant." He leaned down, voice low and sharp. "No. That wasn't the technique I showed. Don't improvise. You're not good enough to improvise." "Yes, Sergeant." She didn't argue. She didn't say, "You didn't teach me anything." She didn't say, "You're wrong." She simply stood, dusted her knees, and waited for the next command. What would you have done? Would you have defended yourself after being corrected for doing something perfectly? Would you have stayed quiet while someone tried to rewrite what everyone just saw? The whispers grew louder after that. At meals, candidates started watching her instead of ignoring her. They stopped joking so openly. They still didn't sit with her, but they looked at her like a question. Jonah noticed the shift before anyone admitted it. Laughter turned into whispers. Whispers turned into quiet watching. People stopped seeing her as entertainment and started seeing her as a risk. Rourke noticed too. And because he couldn't control what she was becoming, he tightened the pressure. He gave her the worst tasks. The extra carries. The last position in runs. The heaviest packs. He made her the example of what happens when you don't belong. But something strange happened under that pressure. She never cracked. She never snapped. She never even frowned. Her calm wasn't passive. It was disciplined. It was rationed. Jonah started to understand that her silence wasn't fear. It was restraint. The kind of restraint you only learn when you've seen what happens after you speak at the wrong time. One evening, after a brutal day on the range, Jonah watched her sit alone near the shade line. She was cleaning her boots again, brushing dust from seams with the same careful fingers. Rourke walked past with two other instructors. "Mercer," he called without stopping, "tomorrow you're gonna learn what the real world does to people like you." She looked up once. "Yes, Sergeant." Then she went back to her boots. Jonah felt a chill that didn't match the heat. Because for the first time, he realized something that made his throat go dry. Rourke thought he was breaking her. But Lila Mercer looked like she was waiting for permission to stop pretending. And if that permission ever came, 90 seconds might be all it took to end the story everyone else thought they were watching. By the middle of the second week, the camp no longer laughed. It watched. The shift was subtle at first, the way storms announced themselves with pressure before rain. Conversations dipped when Lila passed. Jokes trailed off. People who once smirked now studied her, like they were waiting for a trick to reveal itself. The first clue came by accident. They were running perimeter drills, weaving between concrete pylons under a heat that made the air shimmer. Sweat soaked through uniforms. Sand found its way into everything. Boots, collars, mouths. Lila tripped. Not hard. Not dramatically. Just enough to put one hand down. Her sleeve slid back. For half a second, something pale crossed her wrist. A scar. Not the thick, messy kind from training mishaps. Not the jagged edge of bad luck. This one was thin, clean, precise. A line that looked intentional. Jonah saw it. So did Captain Vance, standing near the shade line, reviewing notes. Lila noticed their eyes and pulled the sleeve down without panic. No rush. No shame. Just correction. Like she was used to covering things. Later that day, while refitting harnesses for the rappel tower, another fragment surfaced. As Lila reached overhead, her shirt lifted just enough to reveal the edge of something darker against her skin near her ribs. Ink. Only a corner. Only a shape. Gone before anyone could focus on it. But Captain Vance had seen enough. She felt it in her chest, the uncomfortable tightening of something that didn't belong. Not fear. Recognition. She went back to the command room that night and opened Lila Mercer's file again. 7 pages. Too thin. No commendations. No disciplinary flags. No combat notations. Just logistics, coordination, support rotations. Clean, boring, harmless. Except for the redactions. And the clearance line. The clearance line made no sense. Not for someone like Lila. Not for someone who was supposed to have never left supply depots. Vance tried to pull Deaver logs. They weren't there. Not missing. Sealed. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. People didn't get sealed for no reason. On the range, the clues kept coming. During maintenance drills, candidates were given faulty components on purpose to test problem-solving under pressure. Most of them struggled. Some cursed. Some panicked. Lila stared at the problem like she was remembering something, not learning. Remembering, she rotated the part once, applied pressure in a place no one else had tried, and it slid into place. She paused, looked around, then deliberately fumbled with the final step, making it look harder than it was. She finished 6th. Not first, not last. Right in the invisible middle. Jonah timed her. Again. Her breathing never spiked. Her hands never shook. She never hurried. She never lagged. It was as if she was moving inside a boundary only she could see. That night, Jonah found himself thinking about her long after lights out. Not about her strength. About her control. The way she sat with her back to walls. The way she scanned rooms without moving her head. The way she always chose seats with sightlines. The way she never stood beneath open stairwells. the way she never faced a doorway without knowing what was behind it. Those weren't habits you learned in training. Those were habits you learned when something once went wrong. Another clue surfaced during navigation drills. The course was unfamiliar. Coordinates were intentionally wrong. Landmarks were misleading. Candidates were supposed to get lost. Lila didn't. She corrected her map silently, not like someone guessing, like someone translating. When Rourke asked how she found the checkpoint so fast, she answered honestly. "I followed the terrain, Sergeant," he scoffed. "That's not an answer." She nodded. Understood. Jonah wanted to scream. The whispers grew heavier. "She's hiding something. You see how she moves? That scar wasn't from training. She never looks tired. She never looks surprised. What kind of support clerk knows how to do that?" Captain Vance started watching her openly, not with suspicion, with concern. Because the more she observed, the more one thing became clear. Lila Mercer wasn't failing. She was restraining herself. There was a moment during night drills when it nearly broke. They were running blackout scenarios, moving between obstacles under minimal light. Candidates were supposed to stumble, to lose orientation, to make mistakes. A loud bang cracked in the distance, simulated explosion. Half the formation flinched. Some yelped. Lila didn't. Her body reacted before her mind could hide it. She pivoted, dropped her center of gravity. Hands up, eyes focused. For half a second, she was no longer pretending. Then she caught herself, lowered her hands, smoothed her expression, and became quiet again. But Jonah saw it. So did Vance. So did one of the medics. No one said anything, but the watching changed. Not judgment. Suspicion. Respect. Fear. Vance went back to the file again. She tried different access paths. She tried different terminals. She got the same message every time. ACCESS, restricted. She stared at the screen until her eyes hurt. Because that level of restriction wasn't used for administrative personnel, it wasn't even used for most special operations. It was used for things that officially did not exist. She closed the file and whispered to herself, "Who are you?" Lila was tying her boots when Jonah finally spoke to her. Not a question, not a challenge. Just a sentence. "You don't move like the rest of us." She looked up. Her eyes were calm, kind, unrevealing. "I move like I need to," she said. That was all, not a lie. Not the truth. Something in between. That night, Jonah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. So did Captain Vance. So did more people than anyone admitted. Because whatever Lila Mercer was, she wasn't an accident. And when something like that hid in plain sight, it meant the story wasn't about who she was. It was about what would happen when the hiding ended. The announcement came on a morning when the air already felt wrong. The sky was clear, but the wind kept shifting, lifting sand in thin sheets that slid across the range like something searching. The candidates stood in formation near Range Echo, rifles slung, packs at their feet, shoulders stiff from weeks of punishment. Sweat was already forming at collars, not from heat alone, but from the quiet tension that lived here now. Staff Sergeant Cole Rourke walked in front of them like a man who had been waiting for this moment. He didn't shout at first. He smiled. That smile spread through the ranks like a warning, because everyone had learned what it meant when Rourke smiled. It meant someone was about to be used as an example. It meant the lesson wasn't about skill. It was about power. Captain Mira Vance stood at the edge of the formation with two other officers, hands clasped behind her back, expression composed. She'd slept less than 2 hours. The file had kept her awake again, the redactions burning in her mind like a stain she couldn't scrub. Jonah Hale stood in the third row, eyes forward, stomach tight. Lila Mercer stood near the front, still and quiet, gaze fixed ahead. Rourke stopped directly in front of her. "You," he said, voice calm and sharp. "Step out." A few candidates shifted, but no one spoke. Lila stepped forward without hesitation. Not eager, not afraid, simply obedient. Rourke turned to the formation and raised his voice just enough for it to carry. This course is not for everyone. His eyes swept across the candidates like he was counting weaknesses. This course is not a charity. It is not a second chance. It is not a place for people who think effort replaces capability. He let the words hang. Then he looked back at Lila. And we have a problem. A ripple moved through the formation. The old part of the camp, the part that liked humiliation, leaned in. Rourke's tone became theatrical, like he was performing. Sergeant Mercer has struggled with basic competencies since day one. Jonah's jaw clenched. Lila didn't flinch. Rourke gestured toward her like she was a chart. Slow on obstacles. Average at endurance. Quiet in the wrong way. And on the range. He paused, then smirked. Well, on the range, she's lucky. A few laughs returned, weaker than before, but still present. Rourke stepped closer, lowering his voice as if he was being generous. This is not personal, Mercer. This is instruction. The Army doesn't care about your feelings. Lila's face remained calm. Yes, Sergeant. Rourke straightened and turned back to the formation. Today, we're doing something we call a reality check. The words landed heavy. Some of the candidates had heard rumors, whispered stories. A drill that wasn't written on schedules. A test that didn't exist in official paperwork. Captain Vance's eyes narrowed. She'd never liked the phrase. It was too clean for something that left people broken. Rourke walked toward the center of the range where a wide sand circle had been marked out with stakes and rope. Beyond it, bleachers had been pulled in from storage. Staff medics were setting up a small station with trauma kits, ice packs, and splints. A radio team stood by. A couple of instructors checked clipboards like this was a sport. And then the strangest part. The audience. Soldiers not in the course gathered along the perimeter. Officers lined up under a canopy. Even a few visiting evaluators stood at the back, sunglasses hiding their eyes. The camp had turned the drill into a spectacle. Jonah felt sick. He didn't know why, but he knew something was about to happen that couldn't be undone. Rourke raised his voice again. The rules are simple. 1 candidate. 5 elite soldiers. A murmur ran through the crowd. Rourke pointed toward the far end of the range. From behind a vehicle barrier, 5 soldiers stepped out in matching gear. Not recruits, not trainees. Their posture was too calm, their movements too coordinated. They didn't look like men who were here to learn. They looked like men who were here to finish something. The crowd reacted instinctively. Some leaned forward. Some whispered names. Jonah heard a low voice behind him say, "Those guys are instructors from the strike cadre." Another voice replied, "No." 2 of them are from the base response team. A third whispered, almost reverent, "That's Yates's old squad leader." Rourke waited for the reaction to swell, then continued. These 5 will engage Mercer in a controlled close-quarters drill. Controlled. The word sounded like a lie. The way those 5 stood, loose and ready, eyes scanning like predators, made Jonah's throat go dry. Rourke was still speaking. Mercer will survive for 30 seconds. A few people chuckled because it was assumed she wouldn't. Rourke's grin widened. If she fails, she is removed from this course. No appeals, no transfers, no exceptions. He let that sink in. And she will leave with a mark on her record that will follow her anywhere she tries to go. That was the real threat. Not bruises, not pain. Erasure. Captain Vance felt her hands tighten behind her back. She didn't like this. She didn't like any part of it. And the more she watched Lila, the more the wrongness grew. Because Lila wasn't reacting like someone about to be destroyed. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't bargaining. She wasn't even angry. She was listening. as if she'd heard worse, as if she'd survived worse. Rourke turned to Lila again, voice loud. "Mercer, any questions before we begin?" Lila looked at him. Then past him, at the 5 elite soldiers. Her eyes moved over them carefully, not fearful, not impressed, studying distance, angles, weight shifts. Jonah noticed something change. Her posture was still straight, but it settled lower. More grounded. Her shoulders loosened in a way that didn't signal surrender but readiness. Her breathing, which had always been measured, became even quieter, almost invisible. Her face didn't harden into aggression. It sharpened into focus. Jonah suddenly understood with a cold certainty that made his stomach drop. They chose the wrong person. He didn't know why. He didn't know who she really was. But he knew they had set up this drill thinking they were about to break her in public, and Jonah felt, deep in his bones, that it was going to go the other way. The crowd watched Lila like she was a sacrifice. Rourke watched her like she was his victory. Captain Vance watched her like she was an unanswered question that might cost the camp everything. Lila stepped into the sand circle. The 5 elites spread out around her, creating a loose arc, spacing themselves like they had trained together. One rolled his shoulders. Another flexed his hands. The third shifted his stance slightly, eyes locked on Lila's center line. Rourke stepped back and raised his hand. "Remember," he called, loud for the audience. "This is a lesson. This is what reality looks like." Jonah's hands curled into fists. The medic team glanced at one another. An officer in the back adjusted his cap, watching with interest. And then Lila did something she hadn't done in weeks. She spoke without being spoken to. Not loud, not defiant. Just a calm question, delivered like a quiet blade. "When this is over," she said, voice steady, "do I get my rifle back?" The words weren't dramatic. But the effect was. Rourke blinked. The crowd stilled in confusion, because it didn't sound like fear. It didn't sound like begging. It sounded like someone asking about procedure after a routine task. One of the 5 elite soldiers hesitated for a fraction of a second, eyes narrowing, as if that question had pulled at something in his memory. Captain Vance felt her skin go cold. That wasn't the voice of a woman expecting to lose. That was the voice of someone who already knew how this would end. Rourke forced a laugh, trying to regain control. "You earn it," he said. "You survive, you get it back." Lila nodded once. Understood. She didn't stretch. She didn't bounce. She didn't try to look intimidating. She simply adjusted her stance, feet settling into the sand like anchors. Her gaze lifted, calm and centered, and locked onto the space between the 5 men like she could see the paths they planned to take. Jonah swallowed hard. The crowd leaned in. Rourke raised the whistle to his lips. And in that moment, just before the sound would cut through the air, the camp felt something shift, like the desert itself had gone quiet to listen. Because suddenly, this didn't feel like a drill anymore. It felt like a mistake, and everyone there, even the ones who came to laugh, could sense it. The whistle hovered. The 5 elites tensed. Lila Mercer remained still, ready. And in the next 90 seconds, the camp was about to learn what real reality looked like. The whistle cut through the air. Everything moved at once. The 5 elite soldiers surged forward, not reckless, not sloppy coordinated. 2 angled left, 1 rushed center, the other 2 flanked wide, already adjusting for her position like they had done this 100 times before. Lila didn't rush. She stepped, not back. Sideways. The first attacker reached for her shoulder. She pivoted just enough that his grip found empty air, then tapped the side of his neck with 2 fingers and a sharp turn of her wrist. He collapsed without a sound, legs folding like they had been unplugged. Gasps rippled. The second and third came in together. A pincer move. Clean. Trained. Lila lowered her center of gravity and vanished between them. Not running, not dodging, just absent. Their shoulders collided. She struck once precise, controlled, and one dropped, clutching his arm. Another followed, knees buckling, stunned rather than broken. This wasn't brawling. This was dismantling. The fourth lunged low. She stepped over him like she had known exactly where he would be, pressed down once behind his ear, and he crumpled into the sand, blinking, confused, alive. The fifth slowed. He was the first one to really look at her, not like a target. Like a threat. 90 seconds hadn't passed yet. Lila hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't grunted. She hadn't even looked angry. She moved like she was solving a problem. And then Captain Mira Vance saw it. Not the fall. Not the strikes. The movement. The way Lila shifted her weight, not for balance, but for sightline control. The way she checked angles between actions. The way she never turned her back. And when her sleeve slid back again, just a little, Vance saw the mark. The ink. The scar beneath it. Her breath caught. Her posture changed without her meaning it to. Her hands dropped to her sides. Her eyes widened just slightly. Because that wasn't a decoration. That wasn't random. That was a marker, not of rank, of erasure. The final attacker stopped. He didn't charge. He didn't test her. He raised his hands slowly. "I'm done," he said. Not loudly. Respectfully. The words hit the crowd harder than any impact. Rourke stood frozen, mouth half open, unable to speak. The sand circle was silent. No cheers. No laughter. Just the sound of wind sliding across the range. Captain Vance took a single step forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was different. Lower. Careful. "Stand down," she said. Not to Lila. To everyone else. Lila didn't celebrate. She didn't bow. She simply waited, hands at her sides, breathing even. And in that stillness, the truth spread without needing to be announced, not in words. In posture. In silence. In the way no one laughed anymore. They didn't know her name. They didn't know her past. But they understood one thing with perfect clarity. They had never been watching a weak soldier. They had been watching something that had learned how to hide. The final attacker remained still, hands open, chest rising fast. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Rourke. He looked at her. Not with fear, with understanding. "I'm done," he repeated, softer this time. Lila nodded once. No triumph. No nod of dominance. Just acknowledgement. She turned away from him and knelt beside the first man she had dropped. Not dramatically. Not to display mercy. Just naturally. She checked his pulse, then his breathing, then gently adjusted his head so his airway stayed clear. The second man groaned. She was already there, one hand on his shoulder, the other testing his wrist. "You're okay," she said quietly, not to impress anyone. Not for the crowd, just to him. She moved from one to the next like a medic, not a victor. Every touch was precise. Controlled, careful. Not one of them was seriously hurt. Not one of them was humiliated. Only stopped. The crowd didn't know what to do with that. They had come expecting spectacle. They were witnessing discipline. Rourke hadn't moved. His mouth was still open slightly, like his body hadn't received the update yet. His hands were curled into fists, but they were shaking, not with anger, but with something closer to disbelief. He had built this moment. Scripted it, controlled it. And now it had escaped him. Captain Vance stood a few steps forward, eyes fixed on Lila. Not analyzing anymore, not searching. Recognizing. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft. "Time." Someone checked the watch. 90 seconds, the instructor murmured. The number spread through the crowd like electricity. 90 seconds. No one clapped. At first. They didn't know if they were allowed to. Then a sound broke the silence. Not loud, not sudden. One slow clap. It came from somewhere near the back. A young soldier, not even in the course. Just someone who had watched and couldn't pretend it hadn't meant something. Then another. And another. Not a roar. A wave. Steady. Measured. Respectful. The applause didn't celebrate violence. It honored restraint. Rourke turned slowly, like he was waking from a dream he didn't want. "What are you doing?" he barked. No one stopped. He took a step forward. "Stop this." No one listened, because something had shifted. Not rank, not protocol. Truth. The formation was no longer looking at him. They were looking at her, not in awe. In understanding. Rourke's authority hadn't been challenged. It had been made irrelevant. Lila finished checking the last of the 5 and stood. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at Rourke. She looked at Captain Vance, not with defiance, with clarity. Vance met her gaze, and in that look, everything unsaid was understood. Not now. Not here. But soon. The applause faded naturally, like it knew when to end. Silence returned. Different this time. Not heavy. Reverent. Rourke finally spoke, but his voice didn't carry the same weight. "This drill is over," he said. No one reacted. Because Captain Vance stepped forward. "Correct," she said. Her tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "This drill is over." Rourke turned toward her. "Captain, with all due." She raised one hand. He stopped. Not because of her rank. Because of what everyone had just seen. Lila stood there, hands relaxed at her sides, breathing even. Not posing. Not waiting for praise. Just present. Jonah felt his chest tighten. They were wrong. All of them. Not about her strength. About her story. They had thought she was behind. They had thought she was weak. They had thought she was struggling. But she had been holding back. Not for fear. For survival. For reasons none of them yet understood. Rourke looked smaller now. Not physically. Symbolically. The words he had used on her over the past weeks hovered in the air, ugly and exposed. Paper soldier. Clerk. Doesn't belong. The base wasn't laughing anymore. They weren't whispering. They were remembering. Lila didn't say anything. She didn't correct anyone. She didn't explain. She simply reached down, picked up her pack, and slung it over her shoulder. Then she looked at Rourke. Not with hatred. Not with triumph. With neutrality. "May I have my rifle back, Sergeant?" The question landed like a verdict. Rourke swallowed. The silence waited. He nodded. Someone handed it to her. She took it, checked the weight, adjusted the sling, and rested it against her shoulder like it had always belonged there. Then she turned and walked back toward the formation. Not as a hero, not as a spectacle. As herself. And every person watching knew the same thing, even if none of them said it out loud. They had not been watching a weak soldier. They had been watching someone hide strength because strength had once cost her everything. And now, they would never underestimate her again. Lila Mercer didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for applause to fade. She didn't wait for someone to explain what had just happened. She simply adjusted the strap of her rifle, settled the weight against her shoulder, and walked, not fast. Not slow. Just steady. Across the sand. Past the stunned faces. Past the medics who had prepared for injuries that never came. Past the officers who suddenly didn't know what to say. No victory pose. No acknowledgement. No need to be seen. Jonah watched her go, chest tight, throat burning with something he didn't have a name for yet. He had come here believing strength was loud. That it announced itself. That it needed to be proven. He understood now how wrong that was. Later that evening, the camp moved differently. Quieter. More careful. Word spread without anyone saying it out loud. A few quiet orders were given. A few names were removed from rosters. A few doors that were usually locked were suddenly opened. Lila's name disappeared from the public training list. Not dismissed. Reassigned. No explanation was given. No ceremony. No announcement. Just a change in schedule. Captain Vance signed the order herself, and then she locked the file again. Some stories were not meant to be told. Some histories were not meant to be unpacked. Not because they were shameful, but because they were heavy. Jonah never saw Lila again after that day, but he felt her absence. Not like a loss, like a lesson that had been carved into him. Weeks later, when someone joked about a quiet recruit, he didn't laugh. When someone mocked a soft voice, he didn't join in. When someone said, "If they were really capable, we'd know," he shook his head, because he had learned something the hard way. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need permission. Discipline hides in small movements. In calm breathing. In the way someone ties their boots. In how they ration their effort, not because they can't give more, but because they know when not to. Paperwork can say anything. Records can be edited. Stories can be erased. But capability leaves a trace, and if you're paying attention, you can feel it. Lila Mercer had walked into Camp Raptor Ridge as a target. She walked out as a reminder that the most dangerous thing you can do is assume you understand someone by what they show you. That silence isn't weakness. That restraint isn't fear, and that sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who doesn't need you to know it. Moral: the quietest strength is often the realest, and the cost of underestimating it is something you never get back. Some courage doesn't march. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand to be seen. Some courage learns how to be quiet, how to wait, how to survive in plain sight until the moment it has to speak. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, if it reminded you that strength doesn't always look the way we expect it to, then thank you for listening. These stories exist because there are people who live them, and because there are people like you who choose to remember them. Every name, every quiet act of discipline, every unseen sacrifice matters. And when we tell these stories, we make sure they are not forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more FOB veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.